it's not 25%, but 50% owned. At least then we know the black empowerment parties control those companies. If we look at those, we approved about 27 billion rands worth of funds to those, to about 880 transactions. So that's a 10-year period. So at least we've learned something from that, I think, I hope. The reality is we've had mixed results. Some of those companies are in existence as we speak, and they're prospering. But sadly, so some of those are not. And it's not only because it's, as IDC, we funded Black Economic Empowerment. We know there's an environment in which they operate in. But there's lots of lessons that we can learn from it. And because today this is a frank discussion, I want us to look at the lessons. I think the minister has said it takes leadership, I think, to really come into this space. So we've parked the fact that we don't have to justify why we have to do it. Now, if it takes leadership, that means then when you've taken that role to lead, that means you must take responsibility. Sometimes we have to make the decisions that are unpopular. But sometimes we have to accept that the environment changes, and as a result, when you started funding a transaction, that might change. But also, I think we should all accept that not all of us can be entrepreneurs. That's why I'm employed by the IDC. And if we are going to think we can use BE to make everybody an entrepreneur, I think we are going on the wrong path. This is evident in some of the transactions which ourselves as funders have actually funded, and we've actually failed. Not only have we failed ourselves, but we've also failed those we funded. In some instances, we've seen people who were doctors or who were teachers get into a space where they've not done enough research, where they've not done enough work in terms of understanding the space that they're in. But then they try and climb behind this premise of saying, we want to get involved into a BE. You know, I get to interact with a number of people. So you go to conferences, you go to dinners, and then you meet people, and people say, yeah, but please, ngicela undifande, man. And then I ask, but what business? No, but andithi niyazibona nina xa sifika noma yini. And then I pause and I say, but we're talking about a business that needs to be sustainable. But surely you should start by having done some preliminary work. Which is why when we engage with some of these people, when they come to the IDC for funding, when we say to them, actually, do you know about the market of this? Do you have the technical abilities of this business? Do you know any regulatory environment which you have to comply with in this business? And then we are accused of having a red tape. I'm not saying we are always perfect as the IDC. I think that we can improve. But when it comes to the issue of money, I think it's important that we ask those telling questions. Now, if we're saying we want to look at the issue of skill, then I say, if you are going to have 3 transactions, when are you going to have time to make sure that you understand how this works? When are you going to have time to ensure that there's a technology that is developed, that we can ensure that there's innovation and improvement and all of that goes with it? But also equally so, in that whole space, we've actually found examples where people have taken this seriously, they're focused, they've actually gone and studied more about the industry, or at least the companies that they want to do, or the technology that they want, and they focus on that. They say, okay, we want to understand on PV. And we can see when they engage with us that they've done that and they are committed to that. When we look at BE, we have to say we have a collective responsibility. I don't think it's sustainable for us to have an economy that is centralized or that is only belonging to a certain minority. I think that discussion and argument was made. But it takes all of us to come to the party. So it takes the seller to say there's a bigger picture here. But it also takes the buyer to ensure that he sometimes listens to the funders. Not always, because sometimes the funders might be too risk averse. But I would like to believe as development finance institutions that I represent one of them, then that we shouldn't be. But when we fund or when we look at business opportunities on black economy, I think it's important that we look at the long-term sustainability. There's one issue which government has put in more emphasis now. If you look at the NDP and the New Growth Path and the Industrial Policy Action Plan, all of those are talking about sustainability. All of those are talking about job creation. And this is, I think, is one thing that, as the minister says, we must now look at the new initiatives. That when we do black economic empowerment, we must ensure that with our intervention, we also address that. It can't be to say, I want to control the business, but at the same time then we ignore the issue of employment. Which is why in 2010, as the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, we took a decision that when we fund black economic empowerment into the future, we're going to do what we call it expansionary BEE. What we mean by that is, when you come to the IDC and you request us to help you fund, particularly existing businesses, for startups and new ones, it's good, is that at least 50% of the money stays into the business and grows the business. I know my team has been abused many times when we say that. But we said we're going to take leadership in this role and we're going to hold steadfast and say, this is how we will help in ensuring that we grow new businesses. This is how we'll ensure that we we contribute through the BE, the employment that is needed. But I want to concur with the minister, the issue of trying to justify why we should do BE, I think that's gone past, that's a given, it's an imperative. What we need to do is that when we do black economic empowerment, particularly us as funders, it must also address the issues of job creation.
Yes, I think it is quite common cause to say that black economic empowerment should take place. But is the Black Economic Empowerment Act the way to go? The Act has in its preamble two goals. And the first is the increase of wealth for especially black South Africans. And the second is the improvement of the evenness of the spread of that wealth, that is equality. So two main goals in the Black Economic Empowerment Act. So we have to judge the Act by does it accomplish those goals to be able to support the Act as it prescribes a mechanism for black economic empowerment, a very specific mechanism, one that will be given teeth in the current amendments. The essence of black economic empowerment in the Act is the transfer of the control over capital. There are many elements. We've heard about the seven commandments of black economic empowerment, and I like those. They're going to be limited to 5 if the new codes go through. But we can strip some of them away. We can strip away the improvement of the corporate social responsibility. We can strip away some of the other. The real essence is that the aim of the Act is a transfer of control over the business, over the capital structure behind that business. Does this improve the access to wealth, the wealth of the majority of black South Africans? I'm speaking in terms of the Act here. And does it improve the evenness of the spread of that wealth? So the first is we have to define wealth. And it's commonly thought that the first treatise on economics was by a guy called Adam Smith. I've found one that predates him in 1730. It's by a guy called Richard Cantillon. He was, I think, an Irishman. He was in France, and he made a lot of money in a big bubble. And he made a lot of money. He was a rich man. And he said a lot about economics. But he defined, in his first sentence in this treatise, he defined wealth. And he said, wealth in itself is nothing but the food, conveniences, and pleasures of life. So if we're speaking about access to wealth, we're speaking about for black South Africans, for the majority, then we're asking, does the BEE Act contribute to the access to the food, conveniences, and pleasures of life? Wealth is produced by the capital structure. The capital structure is this immense organization, the structure of technology, of machines, of labor, the arrangement that produces goods and services for consumption. And the important thing is that today's structure produces tomorrow's consumption. So it's very important that the structure is arranged as best it can if we're interested in the maximum delivery of goods and services, that is, true wealth, in future. So the capital structure is very important. Now, let's see, how is the capital structure formed? Well, it's formed by the anti-capitalists. It's arranged by the anti-capitalists. And who are they? They are entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are people who make an assessment about the uncertain future, about the future wants and needs of consumers. The entrepreneurs of today are the people who have to decide what will be the goods and services, the wealth that tomorrow's South Africans will need. So if the best entrepreneurs have access to the capital, if they arrange the capital structure, then we will have the best delivery of goods and services. And if they're not the best, if even slightly worse, the cost will be in goods and services in future. We've heard about the opportunity cost of coming here tonight. We have come to this important discussion, given up something else to do on a Friday night. Well, it's basically the same with the capital structure. If you devote it to the production of some things, you cannot devote it at the same time to the production of different things. So it's very important that the best people who make the best guesses about the future needs, the goods and services necessary, have to arrange the capital structure. And here we come to the big question about the Black Economic Empowerment Act as it is now. Does it further the consumer allocation of resources, or does it substitute for the consumer allocation of resources a political allocation of resources, whereby the resources, the scarce and limited resources that has to be turned into the most wealth for South Africans, is it maybe diverted to politically favored entrepreneurs? That's not to say that they're bad entrepreneurs, but it does call into question whether they are the best entrepreneurs. And this immediately raises the question of opportunity cost. Maybe the political allocation of resources in South Africa in the Black Economic Empowerment Act is to the detriment of consumers, which is the reason for the existence of all business. If it doesn't benefit a consumer, it isn't worthy of being called production. So maybe, and this is the big question, ladies and gentlemen, we have, and one I think that, to my mind, is clear. In the form the BEE Act is currently, it furthers a political allocation of resources instead of a consumer-led allocation of resources. And that means that when we ask the question, should we support the Black Economic Empowerment Act? If it is counterproductive, and if we're interested in an increase of wealth for all South Africans, a cheaper access to goods and services in the future for the majority of South Africans, for black South Africans as the Act is aimed at, if BEE is counterproductive, the Act, then we should not support the Act. I luckily find myself in the company of a great entrepreneur, Richard Maponya, who last year said the same thing, that BE has done the reverse. He has said that it is a terrible system that has created corruption from top to bottom, and it is a system that should be done away with, if that is possible. If we speak about the Act, ladies and gentlemen, and if we find that it is counterproductive, maybe because it directs resources not to the best, but to slightly less efficient entrepreneurs, then it is to the detriment of the majority of South Africans, the consumers. So, to my mind, the political allocation of resources allows slightly less efficient entrepreneurs, or maybe even a lot less efficient entrepreneurs. That includes white, black, colored, and Indian. Because if you're a white guy and you want to stay in business, you get a black partner. That could be one of the benefits of the Act. So, it might be that the Act is counterproductive and that it diminishes the wealth and the equality of wealth in South Africa. And then we should look for other ways of improving black economic empowerment that does not involve a political allocation of resources. I think we need to reconsider some of the key elements, and especially the future strengthening that is envisioned for the Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leroux. That was frank from your end. Can I please invite the panelists? Let me start with you, Christo. In a few minutes, really, what part of redress, in your view, are we missing in the debate that BEE must be set aside?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me go back 70 years ago, when this organization, the AHI, was called into being. Two guys on a golf course decided, let's start the AHI. And for one purpose only. That was to empower Afrikaner people. That was about 70 years ago. Now, how did it go about? It did a few things. First and foremost, it focused on quality education. It made sure that remember at that stage, Afrikaner people came out of the Anglo-Boer War. They were down and out. Many of them were not literate enough. So a massive emphasis on quality education. And secondly, mother tongue education. Because it's no use to have a teacher in front of the class who speaks a different language to what the kid speaks at home. So that was the core focus. 1994 came, and then the AHI embarked on a completely new venture. And that was to say, we've built up this tremendous experience with regard to white economic empowerment. Let's now open up and transfer the knowledge that we have and the skills that we have to assist with black economic empowerment.
Has it failed? Has it succeeded? What must be done?
Very shortly, it has failed in terms of laying a solid foundation of educating people. In other words, bringing people to a level where they can stand on their own feet.
Can it be fixed?
It can be fixed. And that's why we have intervened with our programs. But who are the biggest enemies of BE in this country? State departments that fail to deliver, municipalities that fail to deliver, and unions like SATU, who's really
the enemies of BEE.
Who's really killing the future of young black people in this country.
What is the view of black business in general about the success or failure of BEE? And what are the things that stand out for you about how to define that success or failure for that matter?
Yeah, thank you, JJ. I think for me, the debate that centers around justifying the logic of BEE is really not supposed to happen, where 80% of the people of this country, the black people of this country, are locked out of the economy. And also, if you look at the whole inequality gap, an average, the census 2011 came up with the finding that the average black household income is just over 60,000. and the average income of a white household is just over 385,000. So, and South Africa really has the highest Gini coefficient, whichever metrics you use. You know, there's a lot of debate going around the validity of that statement. However, having said that, we have a responsibility as South Africans to narrow that gap. If you look at the socio-economic effects of the inequality to our country, to the future and sustainability of our economy, we really have a responsibility to be part of the redress. In 2007, thereabouts, BBEC, together with, partnered with government, the Black Business Working Group, and commissioned a research together with the University of Pretoria. And the top 3 constraints to BEE in terms of the finding of that research were the fact that it benefits the small minority of privileged Black people. The second aspect was the high turnover of Black people in business. And the third element was the skills shortage, and I do concur with him, the effect of the inferior education systems. So the whole focus around education is going to be important going forward.
Do you think that there's been adequate monitoring? Because, of course, you have the 13th report of employment equity, which is one aspect of BEE, that can give you an indication of the success or failure. Clearly, according to this report of yesterday, employment equity has failed.
Yeah, absolutely. The monitoring
So BEE has succeeded outside this failure of employment equity, in your view?
Yeah. There are elements that have succeeded. We can't say BEE hasn't worked for this country. That's an insincere response. That's an
Which
insincere
elements have worked
conclusion.
in your view that stand out?
In terms of bringing in a certain component of blacks in the economy, BEE has worked.
Okay.
In terms of also raising the consciousness around the enterprise development and the procurement reform. And actually, the amazing thing, Minister, when we did the study in 2007, is that one of the findings was that actually the private sector at that time had responded much more than the public sector in terms of empowerment. Okay. And the engagement of Black businesses in their efforts. And it was quite startling when we found that that's the case.
Do you think that state-owned enterprises are leading by example? On average, if you look at the last 19 years, in doing what's necessary to propel BEE?
Does Christo support BEE?
He says he does. I mean, he's next to you, you can ask him.
I'm asking.
Christo.
Let alone the BEE Act.
Yeah.
Minister,
Does it support BEE?
Minister, I've been born in the struggle, and I've struggled for equity and struggled against apartheid in this country. So, by all means, we are just not only for Black economic empowerment, we are for African economic empowerment. But we are selling Africa now to foreign countries. My question is just, and that's another debate, to what extent does the state help us really to bring ownership back into the hands of the African? That's the big question that I am battling with.
No, the debate shifts in that regard to something else. And I think you are correct, Christo. We need to have a discussion about that on another day. The reality is, my own thesis is that we must move from the premise that BEE is correct, necessary, that, you don't transform a social system by using a perfect model from the outset.
That's true.
There is an extent of learning by doing in what we are doing, making mistakes, having deficiencies, and correcting them. The question always is whether you have the courage to correct your mistakes, to identify them and correct them. Third, when you have identified those mistakes, you then need to correct them rather than condemn the whole process. Because BEE has had its good and it has had its bad. Which is why I ended my input by saying we need to change the game. And to change the game, you need political will. Obviously, to transform the South African economy, the state has to lead. Because to expect the private sector owned by 80% of which is owned by people opposed to the transformation is wishful thinking. So you need the state to lead, to establish the institutions, the mechanisms, the monitoring mechanisms for that change, and to do the things which are going to bring about the change that we want. And that's why I said the state-owned companies are beginning to be bold. We're asking of them more than what they have been giving, and they are beginning to be bold. They know they have shareholder support, and therefore they can venture. One of the things we need to bear in mind is that, and I think that's the point Jeff made very clearly, is that in implementing transformational programs such as BEE, you need to accept the risk that there might be enterprises and entrepreneurs which and who fail. You must accept that risk. The mistake that we are making is to condemn BEE as a whole because of instances of failure somewhere.
Would you agree with the minister that we need to be able to accentuate what is good and what is bad from the journey, that we have taken over the last 19 years, and not really try and throw the whole thing out?
What the minister is doing is he's distinguishing between, he's concentrating on specific facts, right? So he's concentrating on instances, on examples, and he's making an argument that some forms of the BEE Act's implementation is not successful. He's granting that. And he's saying, well, some forms are successful. What I'm saying is that the Act's design, which substitutes the consumer allocation of resources with a political allocation of resources, means that as a general fact, the BEE Act is to the detriment of the access to wealth and the evenness of the spread of wealth. So I think it would be...
In general.
The BEE Act in general.
Yeah.
Because there are many instances of people who, outside of the Act, identify black entrepreneurs, identify people they have confidence in, and there are entrepreneurial development programs. I'm not making an argument that there should be no BEE. I'm making an argument that an artificial form of BEE, which substitutes the consumer-led process for a political allocation process,
so it must
as
be,
a general
it can
fact.
be fixed. It can be fixed.
If the political allocation is removed, it can be fixed.
Fraud and fronting, surely this is what's giving BEE a bad name.
I think the minister said something which I have always also maintained, that because there are problems, firstly, because there are problems doesn't mean literally you have to throw the baby out of the bath with the baby or the whatever. And I think the second point that is made, that is, I think, quite important also. There has to be a game changer, and I don't know how we can do this, because what we have currently, this 25%, is a source of compromise. We have to do something quite dramatic, but obviously in a sustainable way. And it will be interesting to see what the department, the steps the department, I mean, already with the accounting, that has happened. I also agree with him. We are way past trying to justify black economic empowerment. It's done, gone, no more arguing. How do we improve the implementation? I think that's the problem. That's the biggest question. And I have some suggestions. And one of the things I feel, and it's interesting, the research she's referred to, because we don't know at the moment. With employment equity, we have a report. We don't actually know at the moment what it is about black economic empowerment that needs to be improved, what it is, what the foundational problems are, what are the systemic problems, and how